A banner day in Canadian politics calls for a banner front bench, here to unpack the weight of the Prime Minister losing more cabinet ministers days before an internal caucus push to have him step aside. We've got this evening former Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne here. She's now a professor at the University of Toronto's Victoria College. Former interim Conservative leader and current deputy chairwoman at TD Securities, Rona Ambrose, is with us, as is former Manitoba Premier and Canadian ambassador to the U.S., Gary Dewar. He's now a senior business advisor at Dentons. Hi, everybody. It's such a pleasure to welcome you to the show tonight. Gary, I'll start with you. And I'm sure all three of you are familiar with cabinet ministers quitting at various points in time for various personal reasons. It's nothing to take away from the very legitimate reasons people leave. But when you have four of them announce they're leaving at the same time as caucus MPs, backbench MPs are pushing for the Prime Minister to step aside, that one MP from PEI has gone public saying that he thinks that is the right thing for the Prime Minister to do, Gary, is there an impact, do you think, on the Prime Minister's considerations going ahead?
Well, in terms of the considerations, I think that's one matter. For him personally, I just am really surprised at the lack of air traffic control on the issue of cabinet ministers. I know that most of us meet with our cabinet ministers at least a year before an election is scheduled. October 15th was his 9th year anniversary of the election of the Trudeau government. And usually you try to organize the change of your cabinet members to allow new people to come in, because they can then have a higher profile if the others are not going to continue to run. So I'm really surprised at the lack of coordination on their resignations, their resignation announcements. I can speak for Danny Vandal. He's got a lot of integrity, a lot of credibility in Winnipeg and in Manitoba and Western Canada. So he will be a loss. But I'm surprised at the lack of coordination in this regard. And of course, now it just careens, right against the caucus next week, which somebody I know leaked that story somehow, and somebody that's on our screen. And it was a good get, but it sets up the high volume of the caucus meeting. I happen to believe, when in the $1 million question you may be asking later, I happen to believe the Prime Minister believes that one-on-one he can beat the Leader of the Opposition, and I don't think he's going to leave. So that's the answer to a question you may ask, but that's just I have no inside intelligence in Ottawa. I just believe that he believes he can win one-on-one.
I'm going to ask the same question of your colleagues, but I'll just follow up. Why do you think he won't leave?
I just believe he believes strongly, and he's won some elections before, but he believes when it comes down to an election, usually the only people on TV or in debates are the leaders, and he believes, I think, that leader to leader, he can win the next election. That's what I believe he believes.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's certainly what he's conveyed publicly thus far. Rona, what does your instinct say about whether the pressure becomes too much for the Prime Minister and he does reconsider that position?
Well, I mean, I would just add another layer of complexity onto, I think, an evolving, difficult situation for Justin Trudeau. But I think it's gone to the point now where it doesn't matter who's in cabinet. It doesn't matter even if there's a new leader. This is between the Liberal Party and the Government of Canada and Canadians. They have rejected this government's policies. And unless the Prime Minister decides to make a huge pivot on his policies, unless he decides to scrap the carbon tax, unless he just decides to get immigration in line, unless he just decides to do a lot of other things, he's going to continue to deal with a massive unpopularity with Canadians. And so for me, I think it's time to call an election. And I know that our party has said that repeatedly. It's time for a carbon tax election. But the reason we say that is because Canadians vastly reject Liberal policies. So whether we shuffle the cabinet, we have a leadership race, unless there's a new leader that has a completely different vision for the party, I just don't see an end to this until there's an election.
Kathleen, what are your thoughts on, I guess, the pressure? I mean, you've been there, the pressure that the Prime Minister is facing and the considerations in moving forward or leaving the position.
So let me just answer to the question about the four cabinet ministers, because to Gary's point, I don't think that this was a plan. I think that I know that there have been conversations with all members since the summer. So Gary, to your point, that has been an ongoing conversation with the Prime Minister's team about who's going to run and who's not going to run. So I don't think that it was a plan at all to release these names at this point. So I think that it's unfortunate that all four were released at one time, but that wasn't the plan of the centre. And I can't comment more than that, except to say that what Philomena Tassi said in that clip, she just didn't decide this yesterday. This is not as a result of some kind of internal coup. These are people who have a lot of integrity, who support the Prime Minister, and they have decided for personal reasons, as you said, Vassy, to leave. In terms of the Prime Minister's decision to stay or not, I agree with Gary. I think that he believes that the campaign will make a huge difference, and Philomena said that. She sees it from the inside. And we know that campaigns make a huge difference. And I believe that he sees, and I agree with him, a very dangerous leader of the opposition who, has a shot, obviously a good shot at being the Prime Minister. And Justin Trudeau wants to take that on because we know that Pierre Poilievre has an agenda. We just don't know what it is. And that's what makes it dangerous. So I think that he wants to take this on. Campaigns make a huge difference. And, at this point, I think that's why he's going to stay.
Do you think, Gary, that's that there's merit to that? And I think the broader, obviously campaigns matter. We've seen it in the last number of campaigns. But in the previous campaigns, the Liberals were not 20 points behind the Conservatives for 9 months. They had not lost by-elections in downtown Toronto and downtown Montreal. Is that a considered, do you think it's the right call to make, basically?
Well, I think I want to recall what Sam Nunn said, the senator from Georgia. He said, you got to get out before the Grim Reaper or the Grim Voter gets you. And I think there's a really good message in that might cross the border. I think he's on the wrong side of the most dangerous ballot question you could ever have, and that is time for a change. And I think that unlike 15 and the other elections that he won, that dynamic is very, very strong. And I think he should consider his options, but I do believe he believes one-on-one he could win. But he's on the wrong side of the most important ballot question after a government's been in for a while, time for a change. And I think that will mean a pretty tough and almost impossible election to win right now, or a year from now.
Rana, I know. Right. I know that you spoke about sort of the agenda that the Conservatives are critical of. But do you think, from a strategic perspective, that losing Trudeau as the primary foe would be a hit for the Conservatives?
I don't know if it would make that much of a difference because I think that it's the policies of the government and the policies of the Liberal Party that Canadians are rejecting. We see the polling, whether it's, look, people are suffering. People are feeling they can't afford a home. Especially young people. People feel like they can't make their grocery bill. People are outwardly rejecting the carbon tax from coast to coast to coast. So these are all policies that people feel very strongly have been caused by the Liberal Party and Justin Trudeau. Again, if there's a new leader, so one of the cabinet ministers that wants to run has a new vision, but I have not heard anyone, whether it's Mark Carney or Melanie Joly or Philippe Champagne or anyone who talks about potentially being a leader, rejecting any of these policies, talking about tax cuts, talking about rejecting the carbon tax. I mean, they're talking about quadrupling it. They've all endorsed the Liberal policies that Canadians are currently rejecting. It's not just about time for a change. It's about time for something new and different. And so that's what they have to examine as a party. It's the policies. It's not just the leader.
Kathleen, what do you think about that? And ultimately, the same question to you as I posed to Gary. Do you think it's the right call for the Prime Minister to try and fight it out?
I think it's his call. Vassy, just as it was my call in 2018, you weigh the options, you look at what kind of what kind of situation you're going to hand to a successor. You make a decision on whether you're the person to fight or not. It's a very personal decision with the input from your team. So I think it's his decision. In terms of whether the people of Canada have rejected his policies or not, I'm not going to argue that. What I do think we're facing right now is the Liberals having a huge opportunity to put forward a positive vision, and I'll agree that has not happened yet. But it certainly hasn't come from either the NDP or the Conservatives. In fact, there's only been negativity and anger from the Conservatives who have that 20-point lead. So I think there is an opportunity for the Liberals to lay out a plan that makes it clear to people what they're going to do, what the changes will be, and then we have the policy discussion. Right now, we are spending a lot of time talking about the political machinations. We're not actually talking about policy, except for some very superficial sort of slogans that have come from the Conservatives. But I do think in the run-up to a campaign and in a campaign, there's the opportunity to have a discussion about a real vision for the country with the plan laid out clearly, and that hasn't happened yet.
Okay, I have to leave it on that note. Unfortunately, I really enjoyed the discussion, and I feel like I could keep going for quite a while on the points you've made. Thank you very much, all of you, for making the time for it. I appreciate it. Kathleen Wynne, Rana Ambrose, and Gary Dewar.